Hello everyone, welcome back. Today we're doing the third magician interview. This time it is with Adam Cheyer, software engineer and visionary who created Siri. Yes, that Siri. In addition to that, Adam has sold one company to Apple, sold another company to Samsung. He appeared on season 5 of Fool US, and he helped Boris recently create the deep fake of Penn's voice. So without further ado, if everyone can help me welcome Adam Cheyer.
Cheyer.
Darn it. Okay. Hey Adam, how's it going?
Good, how are you, Jason?
Great, and I have one first question to ask you right away, and that is Siri listening to us before I say, hey Siri, and sending the results to the federal government, monitoring and controlling us like the sheep that we are? Is that what's happening, Adam?
Yes, absolutely. Listening to every thought, but tinfoil actually helps focus the beam, so I'm not sure that's the best thing to do.
You heard it here first. No aluminum foil, everyone. Okay, so the overview of what we'll be discussing today is A, how does it feel like to be the creator of Siri? B, how did Siri even start? C, what was it like for Adam interacting with Steve Jobs? D, the deep fake Penn voice, like how did he do that? And lastly, hey Siri, can you remind me to ask Adam to help me interpret an Aesop's Fable a little bit later?
All right, I've added it to reminders.
Great.
All right, Adam, so before we get into that table of contents, I just want to ask you, I mean, you've had a lot of success in your life. You've achieved things that have impacted the world. Do you have some tip or tips that you could share with our viewers at home?
Sure. So my philosophy is kind of like your Aesop's Fables book. Every book is best done in chapters, short pieces, because you're a different person at different times of your life. And when you're frustrated with your current chapter or some chapter changes happening, maybe you've been let go of your job or you have some new need, what I do is I focus on the core emotion that I'm feeling at that moment. I know this sounds a little new agey, but what's important to me at that moment, and I turn it into words, a mission statement, which I tell everyone I meet. I call this a verbally stated goal. And I know it seems silly, but I can literally tell you every chapter of my life by what was important to me through my verbally stated goal.
And you mentioned it could maybe sound new agey, but for me, I would still trust you because you're an engineer. You're very technically minded. If you were a yoga instructor, nothing against yoga instructors, I might think a little new agey. But coming from you, I'm interested and I'm ready to try it.
Yeah, thanks. I'm also a magician, which means I'm very skeptical of anyone telling me how to live my life. So I give this to you with just a grain of salt. But for me, this has been the greatest tool that I use to achieve my goals. And pretty much I've been able to achieve everything I've set out to do. Telling people does two things. One, it commits you to it. If I've told 100 people I'm going to do this thing, even if I have no idea how I'm going to do it, now it commits me. I'm like, I better get to work on that. And secondly, the more people I tell, people will say, oh, I have an idea, or maybe you should meet this person. They might help you. And so by putting it out into the world with commitment, for me, it's really been the secret of my success.
That's interesting. Sometimes I feel like I need to conceal what I'm going to work on next because I need to make it a surprise or something. But you're right. I imagine talking to people makes it a conversation, and then people will, like you said, offer suggestions about that.
Yeah, I mean, some details you might keep secret, but these are for big goals. Like you might say, I want my work to impact users. When I first got into entrepreneurship, for instance, I didn't know anything about starting a company, but I said, I want to do 5 projects that can impact users in 2007. That was one of my verbally stated goals. Now, I didn't tell them what projects necessarily. Some of them were secret. And in fact, I don't know if you know this, the name Siri is actually secret in Swahili.
Wow.
Right.
I
So
did
for
not.
me, a secret, yeah, secret is something I know that other people haven't figured out yet. So you can still keep your secrets, but on the big scale, I'm going to do this thing. I'm going to create something that will impact users. That's what I'm committed to.
So by the way, what do you think? I mean, obviously I'm thinking about Siri, but like, what are the biggest impacts you think that you've been able to achieve?
Probably the thing I'm most proud of in my career, and I can't really take much credit for it, but I was a founding member and first developer at change.org. So change.org is the world's largest petition platform with more than 425 million members in 150 countries. So what is change.org? Anyone can start a petition and say, I want this person or this organization to make this change, and here's why. And if people agree with you, they just click, they sign your petition. And if you get a couple 100,000 people saying, I want this thing to happen, you've now not just identified a problem, but proposed a solution. And that shines a media spotlight on that organization or person that, they don't have to do what people are asking, but they should at least respond to say why they're not going to do it. So it raises awareness of problems, proposed solutions. Every day there are victories that come about, big and small. I mean, life-changing for many, many people around the world through this. So I'm very grateful to have been there at the start of this project, and I'm so proud of what change.org has accomplished.
Wow, I didn't know you had anything to do with change.org. I mean, if making Siri wasn't enough, also this. And so I haven't actually used it myself. Like I said, I've heard about it. Is it kind of like crowd voted, like which items are the most popular go to the top, kind of like Dig, where the most prominent news goes to the top?
Yes, absolutely. So it's nonpartisan. So for every petition saying I want this, there's probably another petition saying I want the opposite in certain ways. But it really is targeted. You don't say I want world peace. You're like, I want this person to do this thing, and here's why. And the ones that start to get more votes do raise in people's awareness, and it snowballs. Often the major social issues in our country start as petitions on change.org. For example, in 2009, when the economy crashed in the US, banks, we were bailing out the financial systems with our taxpayer dollars, and Bank of America wanted to charge us an additional fee to take out our own money from our accounts. And a 22-year-old nanny named Molly Catchpole said, I don't think that's right. You're using our taxpayers' dollars to get in, and now you're going to charge a fee. And it went nationwide and went really viral. And Bank of America went back on that fee, etc. So it's really a powerful tool that awareness starts to swell and become popular, and then it applies a little bit of pressure saying we think this is what should be done.
Wow, that's really cool. And it kind of makes me want to go, after this interview, go and check to see what's trending on the top currently. And it also makes me think of what things I could try to change in the world,
Yeah, no, it can be as small a thing as, something you want improved in a school, to there have been petitions with 100 Nobel Prize winners signing this for a human rights cause. So it can be a focus on any issue from climate change, poverty, human rights, hunger, pandemics. There may be things that you see that should be better. And if you can spot it and you can get awareness about it and get enough people behind you, you can make that change happen.
Okay, so for example, I could petition that the school's curriculums should include Aesop's Fables, which I think we all need more of. So if all my viewers can go into change.org and vote... No, I'm just joking. Don't do that. That would be a misuse. And before we get back into the meat of the interview, can you expand a little bit on that that kind of like that core feeling and how you grow it into goals for your life?
So for me, it's really important to know if you can find your truth, what's really important at that moment in your life. I believe you will achieve it, especially if you use this tool. So examples, many times I have a question. One of my verbally stated goals was, can I fall in love? Right? From an analytical mind like mine, I had many girlfriends. They all had certain check boxes. They're smart, they have a degree, they're the right age, the right religion. But I had never found someone who really made me feel this is the person I want to spend the rest of my life with. How scary is that?
Right.
And I didn't know if I was capable of it. But by making that something I wanted to find out, taking that emotion, turning it into words, can I fall in love? Maybe the answer is no, and that's fine, but I wanted to know, is love real? Can I feel it? That opened my mind, my heart, something that let me find the person that I've been with ever since, married for 22 years.
Congratulations, by the way.
Really starting on your truth and then committing that you're going to explore that truth. You're going to make that truth. You're going to get to the end of that truth. That's what a verbally stated goal is all about.
And so can you have lots of verbally stated goals going on at the same time, or you generally focus on one until it's complete?
For me, these goals are not for like, wow, I want to lose 5 pounds, or, they're not for the small things in your life. They're for the big, important chapters in your life. You can have more than one, and I've had more than one going on simultaneously. At one point, another one was I had gotten married, and for the first time I needed money. Like I felt the obligation of taking care of someone, and I wanted to provide for them and have a house, down payment for a house, and have a child. I couldn't do that. So I said, I need enough money to have a down payment for a house and to be able to have a child. I had no idea how I could achieve that, because on my salary living in California, it was out of the question. But 1 year to the day after making that commitment, I worked out how much money I needed. I had in cash after taxes that exact amount. I managed to find a way to get there. And so at the same time, I had other goals. So you can have more than one, but these are like big, important, emotional, and not emotional like today, tomorrow, but at this point in my life, this is what I need to answer. This is what I need to achieve. And if you have more than one, that's great.
And do you use some like techniques like stickies on the mirror in the morning, or some kind of techniques to keep that goal in your focus every day?
No, it takes me a while to crystallize what am I really feeling? What do I need? And that's the hard part. Like being introspective enough to really know what's your truth. It's not an easy thing. It sometimes takes me weeks or months. And once I have the feeling start to emerge, capturing it clearly where every word matters is also not trivial, right? But once I have that, I just incorporate into my day any opportunity. Someone says, hey, what's going on in your life? Oh, thank you for asking. I'm going to do 5 projects that can impact users in 2007. I get it out there as many times as I can. And that's how I incorporate it in my life. Once I have the goal, I know that any opportunity I have, I will tell someone, this is what I'm doing, even if I have no idea how I'm going to do it.
Wow, that's really cool. I think that's great advice. And you all got it for free today, so thanks to Adam Cheyer. And I guess now we can kind of get into the main table of contents that we mentioned earlier for the interview. Okay, so the first question we have for you, Adam, the first official question is, how does it feel like to be the creator of Siri? Is there some element of celebrity? Does that present you with other opportunities? Do you wake up and think, I created Siri? Or is it just something you've gotten so used to that you don't even really think about it anymore?
I feel super blessed and lucky. I mean, I have been working on Siri-like things for a long time. I'm just doing what I would do anyway. And luckily, I, hit upon a little bit of success through Siri. For me, it's the perfect amount of fame and the perfect amount of financial reward, right? You can be too famous. So the nice part is no one knows who created Siri, right? So I can walk down the street, no one knows who Adam Cheyer is. It's perfect. I can live a normal life. But if I want to get a little lever, I want to get a connection, I might just name drop and say, oh, I was the guy who started Siri. And for like that, it opens one little door and then immediately closes. So it's the perfect amount of fame. And it's also really, I managed to get out a little bit of money by selling the company to Apple. It's the perfect amount of money. You can have too much money, just like you can have too much fame. If you have billions of dollars, your life needs to be obligated to figuring out how to give it away. Your life becomes, truly about how do you give to charitable causes well. And that's a nice thing to do. I think everyone should be charitable, but that becomes a huge part of your life. It becomes this obligation and this weight. And once you have past a certain amount of money, you don't need any more. You really don't. I don't, have a fancy yacht or anything like that. I live my life in the way I've always lived it, but the difference with Siri is I can now say to my family, we will be okay in retirement. I have a little nest egg that I can say, we will be okay. And that, when you're a young man and you just have gotten married and you now have to provide and put your kids through school, that's a pressure, a weight. And that weight has gone away. So for me, Siri has given me just the right amount of celebrity, which is almost none, but a little help when I need it. And just the right amount of money to give me the security that we will be okay.
Yeah, that's really nice. And it's interesting to know how it feels on your side. And I guess I could imagine, having too much money could be a bad thing, because I guess different people would react to it differently. But some people might kind of like lose the drive or meaning of their life if everything was just like done and like handed to them on a silver plate and there was no reason to strive for any future goals. It might really change your life suddenly. But I've noticed that even though you've already achieved a lot of successes, that you still seem to be a motivated and driven person because you're still moving on to other things. So is that just your personality, I guess?
That's an interesting question. So I think of myself now as an entrepreneur. So what is an entrepreneur? An entrepreneur and a magician are actually very, very similar to each other. Both need to imagine a future that's impossible. I mean, no magician would do a magic trick that everyone can do. No entrepreneur would create a product that already exists, right? There's no point to either of those things. You have to imagine an impossible future and work your way backwards and figure out the math and the science to make that desirable future come true. Siri, if you think about it, 20 years ago would have been seen as a magic trick. You can just pull a device out of your pocket and talk to it in language and it'll respond to you in a conversation and then help you achieve tasks. Crazy, right? So an entrepreneur needs to dream, and I do think they need to be a little bit frustrated. So people say, wow, you must feel so great about Siri. Everyone knows Siri. And I go, yes, I'm super proud of what we accomplished with Siri. But I was so frustrated and I am so frustrated about Siri as well. I have both emotions at the same time because it was meant to be so much more. It was meant to be so much more important in people's lives. And so for me, it fell way short. And that having that drive, that dream that's really big and impossible, even when you achieve success, and Siri is a success, still it fell really short of what I was going for. which means I want to try again. I want to do it again, and get started and try to get to the full goal. So that's kind of my approach.
Imagining future impossibilities and making them possible.
That's
so
it.
I guess that also begs the
Yeah.
question is, where did Siri come from? Like, was there one moment where you're like, hey, I better not activate it. I was going to say, hi, Siri. I don't want this interrupting me. But yeah, how did that get started?
So most people think of Siri as like an overnight success. It came out of nowhere. Apple launched it October 4th, 2011. But the reality is that my first version of Siri was in 1993, before most of you out there probably were born. This was before I saw a web browser, right? My first web browser was Mosaic in 1994, a year later. And I said, someday there will be content and services on computers around the world that you should be able to access. And I never dreamed of hyperlinks and multimedia documents as the way to access it. I thought everyone would have an assistant, and you could say, I want to know this, I want to do that. And the assistant's job would be to understand and to help you accomplish your goal, learning along the way. So for me, Siri was my conception of the internet, an open, massively scaled set of content and services that everyone in the world provides, and it's an interface for how you interact with that.
So right at the beginning there, when you had that idea of accessing this wealth of knowledge through an assistant, did that idea, could you kind of think that idea was spawned from like a sci-fi kind of point of view of the future and like Star Trek and this kind of thing?
I was working at a place called SRI International, Stanford Research Institute. And their job has been to imagine the future for many years. So there was probably a little bit of sci-fi in it, but it's not like I was reading a book and said, oh, I'm going to build that. This was just my conception about how should people interact with computers. And I thought it would be through voice and language and GUI and touch and what's called a multimodal interface that combines all of it. So I built my first prototype. I had a tablet, like an iPad, in 1993, and I could use handwriting recognition, I could talk to it, and I could task services running on computers around the world.
So that was a private company, and how did that go to being integrated in with Apple?
So that was actually just an early prototype in the mid-90s, and I made version after version of Siri throughout the 90s, the 2000s, for something like 17 years. But at one point, I said, this is the time to take this idea and start it as a company. So I got with two co-founders. Dag Kitlaus was CEO and marketeer. Tom Gruber was our VP of design. I was responsible for technology. We started a company and built a free app in the App Store. And we launched it, and we were super happy.
So it was Siri was just an app you would download from the App Store.
It's just a free app you would download from the App Store. And in fact, Steve Wozniak, the co-founder of Apple, says if you ask him today, what's your favorite app? He'll say Siri, not the Siri that came out in the iPhone, but the original app, because that did things that was just incredible and amazing, and I've never seen anything like it. That's my favorite app of all time. So we were so proud of that first version of Siri that I think changed the world.
Wow, I'm so sad that I didn't get to download it from the App Store and try it like that. I guess most people became aware of Siri only after it was introduced as a iPhone feature. But I'm curious what kind of functionality was in there that we don't see today.
There were many aspects that never made it into the Apple version. One was, today, most people don't know the boundaries of what Siri can do. So they don't know. So you can ask it questions. Some it'll get right, some it will not get right, because it doesn't have the knowledge or the programming to answer it. But you don't really know which is which. The original version of Siri had what we called discovery, that would really help teach the user all of the boundaries. It would both enlarge your understanding of what the system could do and contract the user's understanding. And so we had very, very high success rates, task completion rates. The new version of Siri you just talk to and you ask things, maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, you don't know what to ask. So that was a really big component from the original Siri that doesn't exist in today's version or any other assistant that I know of.
Yeah, it seems like in recent years, oftentimes I'll be asking Siri something and she's just offering me a web search. You know, in the past, I used to be able to ask her where to bury the bodies and she would direct me to the nearest swamp. But that doesn't work anymore. What's the deal with that?
I don't know. I guess some executive at Apple doesn't find it as funny as we did when we first built the first version of Siri.
Yeah. So it was an app in the App Store, and what happened next?
So we were pretty happy. Users were starting to use it. The reviews were good. And then one day, we get this phone call. And it says on our iPhone, Apple, Cupertino. And we were like, swipe, 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 answer, answer, answer. Remember, in those days, sometimes iPhone wasn't great at answering. And so on the 7th swipe, we hear a voice. Hey, it's Steve. What you doing? Want to come over to my house tomorrow? And we were like, Steve Jobs is calling us? How did he get this number? Because as I said, Siri means secret in Swahili. We had no website. There was no phone number. There was no sign on our door. So we're like, how did Steve Jobs get this number? Does he know everything? And yeah, so we went over to his house for a first discussion.
And by the way, did you ever find out later how he found that out, or was it just part of his magic?
We actually did. It turned out that when you register an app as an iPhone developer, you have to register a phone number as part of that process. Mm-hmm. We had forgotten that some developer had done that. And so he went mining the App Store database to get the phone number, but it was like a magic trick to us.
Yeah, I can imagine being freaked out in that moment, like very surreal. And so you got to meet Steve Jobs for the first time, and you went to his house. How did you feel? What was that experience like?
Oh, it was crazy. He has a small ranch house. He had a small ranch house in Palo Alto. We went in, we talked for about 3 hours about technology, about the future, about Siri. I really got my first taste of what Steve Jobs is all about. I thought to myself, I'm like, wow, this is a billionaire. This is someone who has changed field after field, computers, with the Mac and movies with Pixar and the whole music industry with iPod and the stores. And then, of course, mobile with the iPhone. You'd think he could just chill a little bit. But there was nothing chill about Steve Jobs. He wanted to win, and he had this fire in him to succeed and do important work.
That's so interesting. I mean, Steve Jobs is such an iconic figure, and he's sadly no longer around. I think a lot of people's curiosity about him is really high, and I've heard sometimes he can be a difficult person. Did you experience some of that?
Well, when we went that first day, he was trying to kind of seduce us, so he was on his best behavior, perhaps, because he made it clear he wanted to buy our company. But we got into our first real spat, so to speak, or debate, I'll say, right on that first day. He asked me, he's like, Adam, should Apple buy, and then he named a company. I'm not going to reveal which company here. And I'm like, no, I don't think so. And he's like, what, why, no. And we started going at it. I mean, really going at it. And I'm like, look, this is the reason, and here's the facts, and here's the data. And the thing that I loved most about Steve Jobs is he was always open to not being right. Some people who are amazingly successful think they're the smartest person in the room. Mm-hmm. Steve Jobs wanted to win. So he was always looking for someone with a different opinion. Now, if you couldn't back up your views with data and facts, he would knock you aside. Like, don't waste my time. I'm busy. But if you could present a case, an argument, and in this case, he said to me, okay, I'm going to think about that. You always felt heard, and that he thought through this decision. There are many times we disagreed about things, about Siri, product, others. Sometimes I think I was right. Sometimes I go, he was right. But I always felt heard. And I think that's one of the greatest attributes of Steve Jobs, is that his ability to listen. And on this example, Apple never bought that company.
And
So maybe I was right.
So what happened at that moment? Did you just sell it to him that afternoon?
Well, so he made a very strong case, but at that time, we were actually not planning to sell our company. We had just raised a bunch of money in a B round investment. We had signed this huge distribution deal that would have put us on phones all around the country, and not just iPhones, but Blackberries and Androids and all the phones around there. So he said, I want to buy your company. We said, thank you. We're flattered. Not interested. Goodbye. And we left. And so, people.
Why?
Well, like I said, we just, it wasn't in our mindset. It was so unexpected. And we thought we had a plan, and we were going to conquer the world on our own. Now, that's obviously not the end of the story. He and Scott Forstall came back to us about a month or two later, and they convinced us that they understood the full vision of what we were trying to accomplish. That we saw voice and conversation as an integral part of every user interface. And he committed to putting Siri into every device, into every interface that Apple developed, and convinced us that we could change the world more with Apple than as a small independent startup. And so we believed him. Also, the financial numbers started getting far more interesting. And with that, we decided we joined Apple, and the rest is history.
So you sold your company to Apple, and then you stroll into the Apple building for the first day. How does that feel? I guess it wasn't the huge Apple campus that it is now, but what was it like? Did you hold Apple in esteem in your mind?
At the time, for me, Apple was the greatest big company in the world. I mean, Steve Jobs was there. They were coming out with unbelievably innovative products. The iPad, iPhone had just come out. They treated their employees incredibly well. Every summer, they would have these Friday beer bashes where iTunes would bring in some of the top performers. We had Maroon 5 and Colby Calais, who was big back then, perform live just for the employees at a beer bash all summer long. So it was the most exciting place in the world to work, for sure.
So you knew it was a good decision.
Of course, I loved my time there.
And so how long were you at Apple, and did you have other run-ins with Steve, or was he kind of just, quarantined off in his own area?
Oh, we worked with Steve enormously. I remember one day we came, and he would walk through campus with kind of his head down because he's so famous, right? There's that celebrity problem. Everyone knows Steve, so he would walk with his heads down, and we were wearing these lanyards, these badges that said Siri on it. And he walked by, and he looks up, and he's like, "Hey, Siri guys, how's it going? Is it working?" He goes, "I want you to make Apple your candy store." He wanted us to leverage every resource. He really wanted us to succeed. He worked with us, and we didn't see him every week, but at least a couple times a month. He was right there working with us to work on product features and decisions. We were arguing and debating these different aspects. It was a great experience.
I'm also curious about the voice of Siri. Like, how did it become that woman? And
yeah, that's a funny story. So that was actually something Steve and I disagreed on. The original version of Siri did not have a voice. And I'm like, why would you need a voice answering you when you have a screen? People can read so much faster. I don't need some robotic voice slowly reading all the things that my eyes can process in a second. Like, it's just repetitive and duplicitous, and why would I need that? So that's one I look back on and go, he was right.
and that's funny because when I think about Siri, that's what I think about. That I guess by the time it was released to the public, the voice was baked in. Like, that was people's first perception of Siri.
Yes. Steve's vision was you talk to it, it talks back to you. The original Siri, you could talk, but you could also type or tap. We had 3 modes of input, and the output was a screen full of information. You know, it still had words, it still had the phrases, but it was like you were working with more of a text chat kind of interface. So very different visions, and I think he was right.
So how did it end up being this woman?
Oh, that's also a funny story. So here's something a lot of people don't know. My claim is that in every language, there is a rich Siri voice and a famous Siri voice. So in the beginning, Apple came out with Siri. They just bought an off-the-shelf voice from a vendor. So they did not know who the woman who was the actress for that voice was. And the woman did not know that she was the voice of Siri, right? Her voice was just bought by lots of products. It was used in the Ford Sync car system. It was used in many different things. But at the time, there was so much to think about. We didn't really think too deeply about it. So that's the famous voice. Now, her name is Susan, I forget her last name, but she goes and says, I am the voice of Siri, the original voice of Siri.
So she found out.
She found out by watching on TV. Her daughter said, Mom, that's your voice for Siri ads. She didn't know. So then, after the first year, Apple realized 2 things. One, they didn't want a voice that other products were also using. And 2, they had recorded voices, a female voice only in the US. People say, well, why does Siri need to be a female? Is that, some kind of chauvinistic approach? Well, I said, well, actually, in France, it was a male voice. And in Australia, it was only a male voice. So certain countries had female voices, certain had male voice. Siri was always designed and built to be gender neutral. But Apple said, well, we should allow users to choose whether they prefer a male-sounding voice or a female-sounding voice. So they recruited a number of voice actors and actresses. My assertion is they said, we're going to hire you, but you can never work again in your field. You can only be the new voice of Siri, and you're not allowed to say who you are.
That's a pretty serious sacrifice.
It is. In order to do that, someone paid a lot of money. So I go, there's one voice who can say, I'm the original voice of Siri, and then the actual voice of Siri has been bought out. And so I'm guessing is a pretty well off because they can only work for Siri voice recordings and nothing else, and they're not allowed to say who they are.
Wow. So. But I bet someone will meet this person in a bar or at a restaurant and be like, are you Siri? And she'll be like, well, I can't say yes. But,
Probably. I don't know who it is.
Well, next I want to ask you about this Deep Fake Penn voice. And Les, do you have any other tidbits or stories you can share with us about Siri before we go to the next topic?
Sure. I'll share one thing that I haven't spoken too much about. Siri launched to the world in the iPhone October 4th, 2011. And Steve Jobs died the very next day, October 5th. His admin, who had worked with him closely then, wrote to me about a year ago. And she said, I didn't know how to contact you, but I really wanted to tell you this. Steve Jobs was clinging to life to see the launch of Siri. He cared so deeply about this that he needed to see it. And so Siri launched, and I like to think that he said, Siri is good. I know the full vision. Apple will be dominant for the next decade. I can go now. So for me, Siri was Steve Jobs' last great invention or contribution to the world, and it means so much to me that we were able to work together, and that he really put everything that he had right up until the day he died.
Yeah, he must have really cared about it and seen its importance, and that's amazing. He was able to see it through to its completion, that he died like the day after it went public. And now I would like to ask you a little bit about I know you were involved with this Fool Us, this Boris Wilde act, creating the Deep Fake Penn voice. How was that voice created? How is that possible?
So I had been on the show in season 5, and then my niece had been on the show in season 6. So the producers knew me through that. And Boris came to them with an act where he goes, "This is what I imagine happening, but I don't know how to do it." And the producers of Fool Us said, "We know a guy." They reached out to me and said, "Would you be able to create a voice clone of Penn for another magician's act?" And I'm like, "Who's the magician?" And I'm like, "Oh, Boris Wilde. I'd love to meet Boris Wilde. He's phenomenal, right?
Yeah.
World champion and an incredible genius." And so I said, "Yes, I will work on that project." So the way voice text-to-speech systems work is you need audio samples. And the first problem was, how do I get audio samples of Penn, enough, clean audio that you could use to fabricate a voice? Luckily, Penn had just come out with a book called Presto, How I Lost 100 Pounds in 6 Months, or something like that. Great book. I actually read it. And in this book, he also did an audio version where he read his own book.
Okay.
So there I had it, 10.5 hours of clean audio.
Could you not have just used like the moments when he was speaking at the end of each of the acts on Fool Us?
I don't think it would have been enough content. Okay. There's not enough variety because you need to cover all the phonemes, all the sounds that humans make. Right? Because ultimately you're going to be piecing and patching the actual sounds, b, k, a. All of these need to be pieced together. And if you can get longer words, like, what is the, then you can use that longer phrase to make it seem more natural as you string it together with other words. So there may be words he's never said before in that order. But the art is finding, at least, if you can get a phrase, that's great. If you can get a word, that's good. If you don't have the word, you have to at least get the phonemes, the sounds, and intelligently string it all together.
So you had this huge source material. Did you just plug it into the machine, just feed it into there and crank it through? Or how does that work?
So the first step was to get the audio. The second was I needed to get aligned words. So I ran the audio through a speech recognizer to say that as these sounds are happening, these are the words that are being produced. And then I went and worked with a friend of mine, an expert in this area. I mean, I do some things in voice and language and etc. But he's one of the world's foremost experts in this area. His name's Emilios. And so he was able to take the inputs, and together we found the right way to produce a voice that sounded relatively natural.
So the moral of the story is, if you don't want someone to be able to clone your voice in the future, don't make an audiobook.
Well, technology catches up to you. Emilios just told me he's now getting to the point where he can actually construct realistic voice clones from pretty short samples of audio. So it is a coming thing to know about.
Yeah. And you did a really good job. When I was watching the show, I was thinking just how accurate that sounded like his voice. You could see Penn's reaction.
Yeah, one funny story was I was actually in the audience as Boris was filming on stage, and I was sitting next to Penn's wife, Emily. And she was watching this, and she turns to me and said, "How did that magician get Penn to say those words?" And I said to her, "It's not Penn." And she looks at me and she goes, "What do you mean? I'm his wife. I would know if it were a voice impersonator or an imposter. I know the sound of my own husband's voice." And I said, "I'm telling you, it's not Penn." And then I asked, "Is there anything that you've always wanted him to say?" And she goes, "Well, there is this one thing I've been wanting to buy that he hasn't said yes to yet. And I'm like, all right, give me a sec. I pull up my iPhone, I type into it, and I produce an audio file with Penn saying, of course, sweetie, you can absolutely buy that thing. And she looked at me. So the funny part of the story is while Boris was fooling Penn and Teller on stage, I was in the audience kind of fooling Penn's wife at the same time with voice technology.
Yeah, that's like the seal of authenticity that like verifies you successfully cloned this person's voice. And my other thought is, wait a second, you had a version of this just running on your iPhone?
I had a version that I could access from my iPhone. One thing is, you might say, wow, that's kind of scary. You could now say, Penn, you could make Penn say anything. We did destroy the voice after the show. I had it running on my iPhone so that if Boris needed some script modification or needed something new, I would be able to be ready to help him at that moment. But as soon as the show is over, and with after that one audio file, which I gave to Emily as like a joke for her husband, we destroyed the voice just for ethical reasons.
That's so sad that it's been destroyed. I was thinking it could be, Penn or whoever could like sell it on the App Store. So everyone could be like playing Penn's voice, saying all sorts of crazy things. But I guess, like you said, there are more serious ethical things that trump the having fun thing.
Yes, absolutely.
Because, people could use that in the courts of law as evidence, right?
Yeah, we're getting to a point, where it will be hard to tell what is truth and what is evidence. Today, if you have a video of someone doing something, you can be pretty sure that they did it. It's hard to fake video realistically, but the same techniques that are coming around deep fake voice clone is also being applied effectively to deep fake video. And so then it's like, if you can make anyone look like they're doing anything, what does that mean if we can't detect that reliably? And it's getting much harder.
Yeah, I don't know how they would adapt to that in the future. I guess like you would just have to have like a decent number of eyewitnesses to try to corroborate the evidence or something. But that'd be much more tricky with knowing that video could be totally faked. And what if, you guys at home, you think that I was able to get Adam Cheyer to interview with me on my channel? The joke's on you. This is all simulated. That's not really him.
This Siri is actually driving this intelligence that you're seeing now.
Yes. And before we get to the Aesop's Fable, I have one last question that a friend gave me to ask, which is, given that you had a lot of highs and success in your life, off the top of your head, what best moments pop to mind? So
here's another tip I give to entrepreneurs. When you're trying to do something big and important, I always say try to visualize success. So I remember when we were just a beginning company, we just had a few guys and girls working, and I walked into an Apple store, and there on the wall of the store were icons of apps from all the big companies. There was Google, there was Skype, there was Pandora, all these like huge companies, Facebook. And so I said, I'm going to visualize success. What would success look like? I said, someday the Siri icon will be on an Apple Store wall right there next to Google and Skype and Facebook. It seemed impossible. I can't tell you, like it took every bit of gumption that I had to even imagine it, but I pictured it in my mind. And so then, fast forward a year or two, Siri is now coming out on the iPhone. I had to go to an Apple Store to see if people are trying it. Do they like it? What's the vibe like? And I walked up to that Apple Store, and as I approached, next to the front door was a plasma display with a sign over it saying, introducing Siri, and then Siri use cases running on a loop as if it were an iPhone. And I got chills down my spine because I remember how crazy it seemed to want to be one icon out of 100 on a wall. And here I was, the front door of the Apple Store, and my mind just blew. And things like that have happened to me time and time again. So I always try to visualize what would success look like, And then more often than not, life will reach out, almost as if it were like tweaking your nose and saying, remember when you pictured that? Well, what about this? I've one-upped you a couple times.
Yeah, that is fantastic. And on the flip side, were there ever any moments where you just felt like giving up? You just like do you remember any like extreme bad moments?
Of course, there are bad moments, and every success is also, for me, a failure. I loved working at Apple. I was proud of what we did with Siri, and yet I had this vision, this dream of Siri as the next internet, open to all and able to change every connected user's life and every connected business in an important way. And Siri doesn't do that. I set a timer or maybe a reminder, but it's not as important as the web. It's not as important as mobile apps. And that is my bar. So I walked away from a team I loved, a product that was just taking off that I had created, in pure frustration. I walked away from millions of dollars that Apple was, dangling out to keep me there, because I needed to pursue my vision. And so then I started another company, Viv Labs, to pursue that same goal. We sold it to Samsung, and just this July, I again walked away from a great job with a team I love, and we have accomplished some incredible things on this, but I am not yet where I want to be. So, despite the success, it's also a huge down moment, frustration. But those feelings can just help fuel the next thing.
Yeah, I've kind of started to be aware. I mean, maybe this is obvious, but like some of these moments of adversity are very difficult moments in our life, can be the catalyst for change that we become very happy that it happened in the long run.
It all goes back to where I started. Life is a book, and if you're living in a chapter and you're happy, write it out. Like, just make the most of it. But when you come to those moments of frustration and angst and desire and like you're not happy, and I'm not talking on a day-to-day basis, but like I am not happy with the direction of where my life is going, you have an obligation to make the most out of your life. You have an obligation to change that into something better. And all you need to do is figure out what is it that you truly need, and then you verbalize it to everyone you meet and go make a better chapter. So yes, it fuels a better moment in your life.
That's very cool. Well, now that we've had some serious, useful advice, maybe it's time to do something a little bit silly, like reading an Aesop's Fable.
Okay.
So we can try
I
this.
haven't done that for many years. So.
I'm going to go ahead and just switch out the battery now because I'm afraid of it stopping. It's recording again. Yeah, maybe that should be an area for upgrading, is getting like a DC cable in there so I don't have to keep switching out batteries.
Now we know what to get you for Christmas.
An electrical
A
cable.
DC cable.
What's this in my stocking? Some coal? No. Okay, so I guess, I've read a good portion of these and a good portion I haven't. I guess we'll just do it randomly and see how it goes. All right. Okay, which one do you want to do? We have the mouse, the frog, and the hawk. We have the peasant and the apple tree. And we have the boy and the nettles.
Well, given that Siri and there was a lot of apple involved, let's go with the apple tree.
Okay. Chapter 69, for those of you following along at home. This is the peasant and the apple tree. I'll try to read it quickly. A peasant had an apple tree growing in his garden, which bore no fruit, but merely served to provide a shelter from the heat for the sparrows and grasshoppers which sat and chirped in its branches. Disappointed at its barrenness, he determined to cut it down, and went and fetched his axe for the purpose. But when the sparrows and the grasshoppers saw what he was about to do, they begged him to spare it, and said to him, "If you destroy the tree, we shall have to seek shelter elsewhere, and you will no longer have our merry chirping to enliven your work in the garden." He, however, refused to listen to them, and set to work with a will to cut through the trunk. A few strokes showed that it was hollow inside and contained a swarm of bees and a large store of honey. Delighted, see, I thought this was going to be a tragedy. Delighted with his find, he threw down his axe, saying, "The old tree is worth keeping after all." And separately, we have a moral of the storyline which says, "Utility is most men's test of worth." So what does this mean? How do we look at this?
I guess the pearl of wisdom that I take from this is that if those poor birds had change.org and just could file a petition not to chop down the tree, they might have had a lot more success. Unfortunately, they didn't use this tool, and they had to go find another tree. So that's my takeaway from this story.
Interesting. Yeah, it does kind of seem to disregard the birds and the grasshoppers or whatever, and focus on this, selfish boy who like chops the tree down and like finds honey, and he like is rewarded for his selfishness.
Yeah, and the honey will, the bees will probably not be happy and they'll fly away. The honey will dry up, and I don't know. I'm not a big fan of this story.
So sometimes I like to see what the story's trying to tell us, but then other times, like you, I'll have my own interpretation of like, well, I don't really agree with that. Make like a counterpoint.
Yeah, it must be more fun to actually debate, just like I would debate with Steve Jobs. Here I am debating with Aesop, and
with Aesop,
we can have different views about trees and honey.
Yeah, I really thought for sure that was going to be like a terrible thing when the bees were inside, because I am personally terrified of wasps and bees. And if I cut a tree open and they popped out, I would be like, out of there.
Exactly. Yeah, that was a little bit of an odd one, for sure.
I don't even know what that means. Utility is most men's test of worth. Oh, it's saying because the honey inside was useful, and so he decided that the tree was useful, and that's how he tested if it was useful or not, just if it served a purpose.
Yeah, but I think there's more. So my mother was very utilitarian. She would always approach something. It doesn't matter what it looked like. It didn't matter the aesthetics in any way. It was if it got the job done, that's how it worked. And I always believed that there was more to just the pure utility in the beauty, in the form. If you think of Siri, there's lots of ways to get that answer to the question. You say, "What's the weather?" And it says, "It's raining outside." But then when it says, "Don't forget your galoshes," it adds a little smile. It's not utilitarian, but it adds a little personality, and that makes people fall in love with it. So again, I disagree even with the Fable's point that yes, utility is important, but it's not the only thing. There is, when you go through life, take utility and then embellish it with a little bit of beauty, a little bit of art. Steve Jobs used to say he wanted to be at the intersection of liberal arts and technology and science, right? Why liberal arts? You don't need beauty and form and fonts to deliver information on a screen. But he found ways to add beauty to the utility, and I think that's very important.
Yeah, I think that's a great interpretation. So thank you for, going along with me on this little Fable reading. Okay, well, Adam, thanks so much for being here. And, you know what? I did forget to ask you one thing, which is, obviously, how did you get into magic? How many years have you been doing it? Do you have a favorite, area of magic, like cards or something?
Like many, I started magic as a kid, ages 10 through 14 or so. For me, it was filled with colorful characters and creative inventions and far-off places, and like the Magic Castle in California. So I dreamed about it as a boy and read every book I could get at the library. Then I left it for 35 years and got back into magic just about 5 years ago when my teen son, started to become interested in this type of thing. And this was something we could do together. So since that time, I have been absolutely passionate about magic. I like to perform, I like to create, I like to meet interesting people like yourself and some of the other characters you've had. So I think magic is such a rich tapestry of creativity and color, and I love to spend free time in the magic world, helping magicians with their acts, creating things. I've been working on like a screenplay with a few people destined for Broadway, and I'm also starting to dream about my next chapter. What's next for me professionally?
What is next for you professionally?
Well, I'm not yet ready to announce my verbally stated goal. I'm still keeping it a secret as it develops. I want to have it in a form that when I'm ready to talk about it, I will have it fully formed.
Yeah, it will be really interesting to see what direction you go in the future, and also it will be interesting to see if you end up kind of shrinking the magic percentage and focusing more on technology again. I think it might be a little difficult because magic is a big, like, endless black hole of a hobby. There's so much depth to it that it's easy to get sucked in there, and you're just always learning more and more. So I'll be curious to see which way your future goes, for sure.
Yeah, well, I think magic and entrepreneurship have a lot of similarities. And I think by having more than one, when I get stuck in one world, I can move over to the other world and create there. When I get frustrated in this, I might move back to magic just as a release, as a creative outlet. So for me, there's a lot of synergies, a lot of lessons shared across the two. And I just love having this outlet. I love meeting magicians. If any of your viewers, want to hit me up to talk about magic or entrepreneurship, find me out there and let's meet.
And what's the best way for them to contact you?
My website is adam.cheyer.com, and there's contact information there. So you can find me.
All right, cool. And although I haven't gone through season 5 yet, because I started really in season 6, Adam Cheyer performed on season 5. So if you want to see his performance on Fool US, I'll put a link down below, as well as his niece, Zoe LaFleur, who I already did react to from season 6. I'll put a link to her as well, so you can check out both of those. So Adam, thank you so much for being on this video. I really enjoyed hearing about your life and your experiences and these pearls of wisdom you shared with us.
Thanks so much for having me. This was a great time.
So that pretty much covers it. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to smash like. And yeah, I guess that's all. Hope you guys have a great week. And Adam, are you ready?
Ready.